Hello, everyone. On behalf of the National Association of State Auditors, Comptrollers, and Treasurers, I would like to welcome you to our webinar entitled Corruption, Fraud, and Federal Program Theft in the County Attorney's Office, a Case Study. My name is Josh Winfrey, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director of NASAC. I will be serving as your host for today's event. We are joined today by over 1,000 government accountants, auditors, and other interested parties from at least 24 states. Unfortunately, during the COVID-19 era, we've seen far too many cases of fraud as bad actors, both foreign and domestic, have taken advantage of federal programs intended to help citizens in need. But as we all know, fraud within government agencies has always been a threat in good times and bad, and this is especially painful when it occurs at the local level by those closest to the communities that they serve. And that's the focus of today's webinar. We are thankful to have with us today Chris Darman, a forensic accountant with the FBI based in Central Kentucky. Chris has been involved in numerous investigations, and in addition to his work with the FBI, he has performed both financial and internal audits. You can find more information in his bio, which is available on the webinar landing page. Before we get started, I need to cover a few housekeeping items, including our CPE process. You should have received an email from us outlining this process, but I'll quickly summarize it now. We're using a tool called Conferences.io to submit attendance codes and request CPE. To do this, each participant will need to use the internet browser on your computer or mobile device. Open a browser and navigate to nasac.cnf.io. And Chris, if you'd advance one slide, we'll show that on the screen so that everybody can see that. Here you can see it on your screen now with a QR code as well as instructions for accessing. Once you're there, click on today's session. You will then be prompted to enter your name and email address. Be sure to enter your name as you wish it to appear on your CPE certificate. At various times throughout the webinar, the speaker will arrive at a slide which contains a 3-digit CPE code. The first code for this webinar, it will be on your screen momentarily. Chris, if you'd advance one more. This is the first code of today's session. This is not a test code. When a code like this appears, you will need to go to Conferences.io, tap the Code Words button located in the upper right-hand corner, and submit the CPE code. This is our way of verifying that you are actively engaged, which is a requirement for any CPE session being held virtually. Today's webinar qualifies for 1 CPE credit hour, which means we will have 3 total attendance checks in order to comply with the CPE standards prescribed by the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. You must provide the codes for all 3 attendance checks to receive full credit. A CPE certificate will be emailed to you within a few weeks. Following the presentation, we will have some time for live Q&A. To ask a question, simply type and submit your question using the social Q&A feature in your browser. You can also upvote a question if you see one that you like. Chris will be using PowerPoint for his presentation, but FBI policy does not permit the sharing of slides, and so we have not included a copy in the materials, and we cannot distribute a copy. If you have any questions or experience any problems with the CPE process, please call our office at 859-276-1147 or email Meredith Johns at mjohns@nasac.org. Again, this is the first code on your screen for this session. This is not a test. Chris, given your line of work, I wish you didn't have such a busy schedule, especially where you are, but I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Sure.
And with that, I'll turn the program over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Josh. And thank you to NASAC and everyone involved for the invitation here to speak to this group. I know many of you, I can appreciate what you do on a daily basis. I started out in public accounting with one of the big 3 firms before I went into internal audit with a publicly traded company and worked there for 14 years. So I know oftentimes you can feel like your work is just an annual repetition of certain steps, and it doesn't always yield to the same kind of outcomes you would hope for. But I hope today's presentation shows you that the work that you do can have a tremendous impact and hopefully deter public officials from committing crimes. Today's presentation Covers an investigation that occurred here in Kentucky. Started out as an audit by the Auditor of Public Accounts. That's how it's deemed here in the state of Kentucky under the Auditor's Office, where it was later referred to us. And I hope many of you kind of see some similarities with some of the policy and audit roles that you do, and perhaps see an opportunity where in those cases where a significant crime has occurred, it might be something worth referring to your local FBI office for prosecution. Okay, so today we'll start off with kind of an introduction of who's involved, followed by how we got involved in opening a case here in Kentucky. I'll take you through some key points and events that during our investigation, and then the prosecution that followed. Then we should have some time for questions. Okay, here are our two subjects of the investigation. The first here is Mike Hogan. He was the Lawrence County Attorney for many years, originally elected into that position in 2003. That was not his only effort through public office. You see here that he ran for lieutenant governor in 2019, and prior to that, even it was involved in running for attorney general for the state of Kentucky. Um, so very much a fixture in public office and politics. Joy Hogan started out as a legal secretary in his private office, um, and then moved over to the county attorney's office and worked alongside him during that time frame from the 2003 time period through the prosecution. Here's a state of Kentucky for those of you who are maybe have not traveled here to the beautiful Bluegrass State. That arrow in the middle represents Fayette County, where Lexington sits. And we have what's called a resident agency office of the FBI. We are like a sub office of the Louisville field office, which is that left arrow. Um, and then Lawrence County, all the way on the east side of the state, where the city of Louisa sits. So as the county attorney, Mr. Hogan would have had responsibilities over a population of roughly 15,500 people. And then there with Louisa's 2,700. Okay, so some of you, depending on each state, you probably have a little different structure, but the county attorney is a constitutionally set position here in the state. And they have a multitude of responsibilities. It's an interesting state position where they will serve as the essentially the attorney for the county in all matters legal for the county. They are that legal representative. But they also have a role in collecting delinquent taxes. Um, Additionally, most of the county attorneys will participate in a program to enforce child support and go after non-payers. That is sort of a supplemental income for these county attorneys, where presently they can earn $55 an hour for work related to that program. And this is an interesting point here that child support enforcement is 2/3 roughly funded by federal grants. So that is an important factor when it comes to jurisdiction on how federal prosecution was involved in this investigation. Additionally, they do have some role in the criminal prosecution, juvenile court. The way we're set up with a district and a circuit court, they would be dealing with matters in that district court before things are presented before a grand jury. Which means for these county attorneys, their compensation is multifaceted. They will get a portion of their salary from the state. Our prosecutors, our PAC will set that rate. The local county fiscal court can also pay a salary to that individual. They have the income from the child support enforcement, and they are not precluded from having a private practice. They can still maintain their own legal office um, and take on private case matters, which separate from this case, a lot of these county attorneys had some conflicts and overlaps where the state or county was picking up expenses for the private practice, which they've tried to enhance the guidance and policies to prevent that. But probably played a role here where Mr. Hogan was in office for so long and clearly benefited from this broad ability to earn income from multiple locations. And as I said before, also representing the county fiscal court. So they will participate in all county meetings and represent the county in any legal matters, civil lawsuits. Okay. The state of Kentucky, the Audit of Public Accounts, completed an audit that was published in 2020. And for this particular audit, they selected 9 different county attorneys' offices. We have 120 counties in the state of Kentucky. This audit was targeted on 9 of those. Within that audit report, they had identified that during a period from, on a fiscal year basis, July of 2017 to June of 2019, the Lawrence County Attorney's Office had been paying bonuses to staff. And within that bonus distribution, a significant portion of it were directed to one particular position, the legal secretary. And as it turns out, that legal secretary was Joy Hogan, Mr. Hogan's wife. The issue with this is multifaceted. One, clearly there's a conflict of interest with the vast majority of the bonuses being directed to one particular person who is related. But also there was multiple levels of guidance to prohibit this kind of pay. The positions within that office are statutorily limited on how much they can pay based on the job role. Even where the county attorney has discretion about spending of certain funds, those are supposed to fall under the reasonable standard of how those monies are spent. Any unspent monies are supposed to be returned back to the county. That did not happen in Lawrence County. There was more of an attitude of whatever we have available, we are going to spend one way or another, primarily benefiting Ms. Hogan through bonuses. There's also a prohibition against self-enrichment, which is a challenge that Mr. Hogan had in trying to explain these bonus payments. We interviewed a county attorney from a different county just to get an appreciation for how it worked, roles and responsibilities, restrictions on use of funds. And it was very clear when we brought up the subject of bonuses that they are prohibited, just not allowed based on guidance to all of the county attorneys, and that should not have occurred. This individual even expanded from just sort of stating what the rules and regs are, but also felt that if they had done such a thing, that they felt there's a good chance that they would be arrested for doing such acts. So that's what we have happen here. As I had said earlier, these salaries based on the position in the office had limits on how much could be paid no matter which county you were located in the state. And having this discretionary bonus program was a violation of that policy. The audit process in the state of Kentucky, you'll have the audit findings, and then each office had an opportunity to provide a response to those audit findings. And here, Mr. Hogan had provided the explanation you see here, that the payments to Miss Joy Hogan were for her work and her work alone. He had described it as supplemental salary that was earned, and not in violation of this audit bulletin guidance that was issued and cited in the audit report. Here you'll see that this reference to reasonable use of funds, so specifically within this court case that's cited, that those expenses are required to be reasonable in amount, beneficial to the public, and not predominantly personal to the officer, in this case, Mike Hogan. Additionally, the audit report had cited that supplementation for the honest pay for honest work was his explanation, to say this isn't really bonus, this is really earned monies based on the work output. This is how he felt he would answer the audit findings. At the same time, we also received an anonymous letter, presumably from someone close, if not within the county attorney's office, that alleging that Mr. Hogan and his wife had misappropriated, from their viewpoint, $53,000 in 1 year's time, identified that there was potentially a separate account using delinquent tax fees earned by the county attorney's office, and that account had bank statements that were being mailed to a personal residence, that they were writing checks to themselves as supplemental income and using those funds to pay personal expenses, American Express bills, travel. Included with this letter was also some photocopies of a checkbook used to track this account. And here you'll see some sample pages from 2014, maybe also 2015, that we have highlighted some particular entries of interest. And you'll see that here on this one particular page covering April and May, there's sort of a pattern here of checks either to Joy Hogan or the initials JH. And those also tend to be the larger amounts from this check register. Here's another of those sample check register photocopies. And you'll see Joy Hogan, also some other fundraising charity contributions, an American Express bill that were clearly suspicious in nature. This last one, continuation of checks issued to Joy Hogan. Here on this one on November 1st, do take note of the amount, $15,000. So a significant check, and the pattern continued. So this also was important to find justification for the FBI to open our own investigation and look into this further. At this point, I think we've got a new code for you guys to jot down or fill out on your app. So I'll sit here for a moment to make sure you capture your next code.
Yes, Chris, thank you. We'll leave this up on the screen for just a little bit longer. That second code is 854. You can see that on your screen now. 854. This is code 2 of 3. All right, thank you, Chris.
Sure. Okay. So that kind of sets up how we were first introduced to this case based on the auditor reports, meeting with a separate county attorney, just kind of get an understanding of what these programs involved, how they should work, and then in addition, receiving this anonymous letter and very suspicious check register images substantiating these payments to Joy Hogan. So we spoke with our local U.S. Attorney's Office to see if they were interested in opening up a case. You see here, we opened up a 194 case, and this uh, particular is for a public corruption of a local state level, um, and then proceeded to try to interview some witnesses that would know more about what was occurring in Lawrence County. But here is a challenge where, as you saw in an earlier slide, Lawrence County is pretty small. Probably everyone knows everyone, and trying to approach people to on an interview without letting the potential subjects know what's going on can be challenging. But those initial interviews help substantiate, justify an affidavit to get a search warrant of the Lawrence County Attorney's Office, and that search occurred in July of 2020. Okay, some of our initial witness interviews were with individuals who previously worked in that office. We started to see kind of a common theme. One of those being that Mr. Hogan was rarely in the child support enforcement office. This office was separate from that of the county attorney's office. But despite not being in that office, was claiming a large number of hours to the program at that $55 an hour rate, which important to note here that 66% of that program is based with federal fund grants. Second, this was kind of a disturbing revelation that those employees during their time working for child support enforcement had gone through periods where uh, their check had to be held and they went weeks without getting payment. The way the child support enforcement budget works, each fiscal year they will get 1/12 advancement of the estimated expenses for the year so that they have monies available. And then each month, the county has to submit paperwork to substantiate the hours for the employees, expenses incurred, and then they're reimbursed for those costs. Um, but what ultimately was happening is if one or more individuals, in this case primarily one, is inflating hours, that was using funds that would have been otherwise available to pay the employees for hours they've actually worked. So we were hearing this with many of the witnesses that they had gone through one or more time periods where they had to go without a paycheck. Um, they were aware that Mr. Hogan was paying bonuses, and they had understood it to be mostly occurring around the Christmas time frame. A common number that was expressed to us was about $500. Uh, Nothing really more than that. Small little bonuses that each of the employees said that on more than one occasion they had received. Um, One of those witnesses also let us know that the records for the child support enforcement office um, were located in the separate part of the building, which is important if you're trying to ask a judge for authorization to complete a search warrant. We have to explain why we are going to this particular location and what relevant records may be there. So this helped us understand where the historical records for the program are located. Also during this time frame, there was an individual with the state that had been contacted by Mr. Hogan after the audit report had been issued. And this individual contacted us to see if we had any concerns if they had recorded this phone call. And so they actually did record. And in the state of Kentucky, we're a one-party state, so that as long as one party of the conversation is aware that it's being recorded, it is legal. And this individual did record this call, and was interesting to hear Mr. Hogan talk about how he was surprised of the audit findings. And at this point, it still felt that it could be explained that nothing illegal had occurred. Um, it's a good point to make here again, just given the small nature of the office, but also this is someone in an elected position, still a prosecutor for the county. Um, it is a challenge to try to work around this as you're trying to meet with individuals who can provide, firsthand accounts of what occurred historically, without letting the main subject know what's going on. So a search warrant did occur. This is a picture of the office where that search was completed, and numerous records related to the Child Support Enforcement Office were collected. Since this does involve legal matters, we had to establish what we call a taint team that's separate from the primary investigative team, so that those records are viewed first to see if there's anything that might be private, attorney-client matters, or otherwise personal matters, or maybe you're just not even relevant to our investigation. So that can take some time depending on how many records they have to go through before they would release those records back to the investigative team. Also on that day, the current supervisor for the Child Support Enforcement Office was interviewed. And at first, she was, um, I wouldn't say defensive, but just not really forthcoming with answering our questions. But as the interview progressed, and she started to understand that we knew a little bit more than she thought we did, she started to open up and explain more detail. So from that interview, as I said, kind of denials, but tone changed about halfway through, and she had revealed that Mr. Hogan had been lying on his timesheets for quite some time. And I think she had some relief that sort of a lot of this burden had fell on her, because of what she was asked to do in helping him complete these forms, submit them to the state. Somewhere, probably in the mid 2000s, the state had created requirements where you had to use timesheets to substantiate your time. And behind those timesheets, you actually had to explain what case and what were you doing specifically. So the admin paperwork had increased because there was concern that people were just sort of rounding and guessing at the hours spent on this program. But here, this individual, the supervisor, was being tasked to, like, well, how am I going to substantiate all this time that Mr. Hogan's asking to be billed each month? So I think there's a bit of relief that she could finally have this burden off her shoulders. Um, Additional complicating factors as to why she probably wasn't forthcoming. There's fear of, one, is there something that they did to make her complicit? But also, you're going to lose your job. In many of the counties in Kentucky, a state job is one of the better paying jobs. It might be your only way to perhaps provide health coverage. So there's a fear of losing that job. Also, we were witnesses were sort of describing Mr. Hogan as kind of being uh, almost verbally abusive, kind of demanding, intimidating, and sort of that clearly carried over into how they were holding back initially with us during interviews. She also had explained, consistent with prior witnesses experiencing gaps in when she could deposit her paycheck. At one time, had gone up to 2 months without one. Um, and he was blaming the state on not providing the reimbursement to fund the checking account timely as the cause, and not taking ownership for the fact that his checks were still getting deposited, but just the staff were being asked not to. Here you'll see an example of one of these timesheets for Mr. Hogan. This is covering let's see, probably yeah, June of 2018. So kind of a suspiciously consistent high amount, full work days covering the Child Support Enforcement Office with additional hours for attending court. And this was a consistent pattern during the period investigated of um, this kind of inflated number of hours. This is the supplemental record, also required, that the supervisor was being tasked to fill out to show on these days which particular case, what they were doing. So it was sort of a subset of those 8 hours in each day. So a lot. And in fact, I think what she ultimately was doing was explaining what she did in her daily role as the supervisor of the program, except here she's giving credit to Mr. Hogan for the work she completed. Um, this table here on the right for Hogan's billable hours before the search warrant, this is an example from some spreadsheets I prepared in compiling all of these records. So you can see a consistent 50 to 75 hours per month, every month, where he was earning $55 an hour. So this is before the search warrant. Then there was sort of a lull, and when he was submitting CSE hours, and the first time period he submits after the search warrant of the office, he only reported 18 and a half hours, which gave us a pretty big clue that although this, I suspect, was probably a little inflated itself, but clearly closer to reality as opposed to the 50, 60, 70 hours per month he had historically claimed. And here you can see signed on that one submitted after the search warrant. So we really had two elements to the fraud scheme going on in this office. First, there was funds earned by the county attorney's office for delinquent taxes. So where the county attorney is going after those individuals who have not paid their property tax, and if they have to go to courts and get individuals on a payment plan or foreclose on a property, they would earn a percentage of the monies paid for that tax lien. Those funds are available for the county attorney to spend on office expenses, but he used it as a piggy bank for bonuses. So we had this element of disproportionately benefiting Joy Hogan with the bonuses, which also appeared to be going to benefit not only her, but him, being the spouse. Separately, this child support enforcement program, federally funded, where he was overbilling that program for hours that he never earned, while having other employees go without a paycheck. This element of Mr. Hogan benefiting from the bonus payments paid to Joy Hogan was important because as we analyzed the bank records, There was a time where those checks were being deposited in a joint account, but for a good number of years, Ms. Hogan had set up a personal account only in her name where she would deposit these funds. So we had to then trace those funds further to say how were they spent, or were they transferred later to another account? And that was the case where we could demonstrate that although initially put in a personal account, it went to pay a credit card that they were both parties of, or went to a joint checking account that then paid bills of the household. We ended up interviewing additional witnesses after the search warrant had occurred, being current and or former employees of the office, um, consistent with what we had heard from the original initial witnesses of um, not really in the office, paying bonuses, same support. Um, and again, this common statement of this was a great job and they didn't want to lose this income. And so they were willing to just kind of go along with what the boss had asked them to do. So I would imagine in a lot of the public audits that are performed out there, this is probably a common theme where this is a good, steady paying job, might have health benefits, a pension, and probably a willingness to just do what they're told in an effort to preserve their own employment. Here with the financial analysis for the years we were able to obtain records, we went back to 2013 to 2020. Um, you do run into a challenge with bank records. Most financial institutions will not have anything greater than 7 years historically. So that kind of when you suspect something has gone on longer, that can be frustrating as the auditor or investigator that you can't really get back at those earlier records. But here we could definitely establish that this had been going on for a number of years. Specific to the delinquent tax account and bonuses paid to Ms. Hogan, that was $366,000, consisting on numerous checks. And there we could also see that those statements were often addressed to home and or the personal office of the Mr. Hogan, where only they would have visibility to it. The child support enforcement for the period we were able to analyze, we had estimated that he had illegally earned or illegally claimed $280,000 in additional income. And this had a magnifying effect because this is just looking at it from the standpoint of $55 an hour. But the state was also paying into his pension a matching percentage based on this fee. So he was getting it from a net payroll, but also enhancing his retirement through this fraud. Um, so we'd also established through this financial analysis that Mr. Hogan had benefited from the bonus checks paid to Joy based on the co-spending. And from those credit cards, we could see they were going on trips and other expenses. Here you'll see some other interesting information gathered. Um, Individuals who worked in the office had occasionally received text messages from Joy specific to the child support enforcement program. And I'll give you a moment to kind of read these. They're pretty revealing. Here in May of 18, Joy had asked this individual or said, Michael's going to bill 104 hours this month. And here it makes reference to Dan, who was doing some bookkeeping for the program. And The significance of this is the end of the fiscal year for the program. So this was an effort to just spend down every last penny that remained in the program. So 104 um, to get an extra for the month, and also to go ahead and buy the necessary supplies for the office. The second one, April of that year, 78 hours for Mr. Hogan. Um, and then this third one, asking for 82 hours. So this was also very helpful in our investigation to have this communication from Joy, her participation in the reporting of CSE hours on behalf of her husband, that were being asked to be reported to the state that were in excess of hours actually earned. Um, let's see, here are some other examples of additional texts. Here's one from Mr. Hogan himself, um, on the need to do substantial amount of hours for himself as administrative time and court time, um, saying that his hours need to come first, and that whatever he needs to do to sign for it. This we had revealed from an extraction of a cell phone where Mr. Hogan had stated to this individual, just bill additional hours for me to eat up all the extra money. How many hours it takes, just bill that money, that many, no more, no less. So definitely get a clear state of mind of this individual and how they viewed this program as their personal um, account, and not what it was intended for, to serve the people of the county and child support enforcement, and also to compensate those that are actually doing the work. Prosecution, Mr. Hogan was indicted on 15 counts. Count one was a conspiracy count where there was two or more individuals involved in this crime. Counts 2 through 10 were under the wire fraud statute. And the last 11 through 15 were through a theft of public funds. This has some specific nuance about how much federal funding is involved with the program, and how much was of the crime has to be in excess of $10,000. So there was a count charged for each individual fiscal year for that theft from the child support enforcement program. Ms. Hogan was indicted on the one count of conspiracy to the wire fraud, um, for the crimes that and her involvement in this situation. Um, Here's Mr. Hogan's audit response that we had viewed earlier. Um, Here, based on the federal wire fraud statute, since he had communicated this response to the state auditor's office through an email, it was deemed a wire communication. Therefore, his statements about those bonuses to Joy Hogan being reasonable for honest work, honest pay, clearly fraudulent, um, were elements of that wire fraud charge. Mr. Hogan was arrested following the indictment. He refused to an interview, but his cell phone was seized at that point in time. He was allowed to contact his attorney, but then we took possession of that phone for it to be analyzed by our regional electronics office here, our RCFL. We also obtained a search warrant to go through the contents of that phone, which required a second taint review, just to be cautious to any attorney-client privileged matters or other non-relevant material from that extraction. Okay. Following the arrest, Mr. Hogan resigned from the Lawrence County Attorney's Office in March of 2022 after a lengthy time period on administrative leave. Both ended up entering a guilty plea in March of 2022, and sentencing occurred in September. Mr. Hogan received 42 months incarceration for his role, followed by 3 years supervised release, and a restitution order of nearly $600,000. So that's the combination of the child support enforcement and the delinquent tax bonus payments. Joy Hogan received 1 year and a day for her role in this, and her restitution was specific to the bonus payments of $366,000. Here's some of the news clippings that came out following that um, guilty plea. Clearly, important to see this from a point of deterrence and accountability for a public official. The judge that oversaw this sentencing, it's made some specific remarks about how, as a public official and one that's asked to uphold the law, how much damage it does when someone commits these sort of crimes and violates their oath to the profession, to the office, and to the people of their community. At this point, we can open it up for questions anyone might have.
We have several questions, Chris.
Oh
So
boy.
I've got
Okay.
some that have been elevated to the top here with the voting. Our number one question, were there no conflict of interest policies prohibiting having someone's spouse working for them?
In this case, that was raised, and usually what will happen here is it wasn't that Miss Hogan wasn't qualified for the job. So it was known that there was a relationship, but probably no ask to have any particular oversight or additional separation of the duties beyond the fact that they had reported the relationship. So it was not a secret. It was known of this relationship, but really didn't go any further than that.
Another question, did any of Hogan's employees who supported this fraud scheme get charged?
So no. Here where I was saying some people felt a hesitation, they were a little concerned, am I going to get wrapped up in this for what I did? And there we took the stance of they didn't benefit. There was no financial benefit to those individuals who were asked to do something that they knew was fraudulent. Um, so no, they were not prosecuted. It was really focused on who financially benefited here, Mr. and Mrs. Hogan.
In your experience, are there key considerations or differences when investigating and prosecuting in an environment that most community members know each other? I think that's a really interesting
It
question.
it it, it is, and so we're often slow and deliberate and how we approach people to interview, be as discreet as possible. Um, it's not always successful. Sometimes you have to, it becomes overt before you really want it to. But it is a concern and a tactic we have to take in these smaller communities where rumors can start and move quickly. That federal investigators are asking questions.
Yes, in those communities, having been there, I imagine they knew you all were there when you stopped for gas when you crossed the county line. So yes,
Yeah,
that's very
if
tricky, very tricky.
yes. Now here we
Uh,
had the benefit of the auditor of public accounts had already completed a substantial amount to really identify this issue. Had we not had the benefit of what they had already revealed, it would have been much more challenging since just as a part of the normal audit and response process, they had first level documents, they knew of the accounts involved. We had opened up the time frame that the audit had covered so that we looked back further, but really their work, which um, was done out in the open, uh, took this a long way. So it was a great benefit.
Well, the Kentucky APA is a great office. They do great
Yeah.
work. And our next question is probably touching on that methodology. Was the county chosen because of suspected fraud, or was it chosen through a random selection?
My recollection when we met with the auditors that they had done some high-level analytics of um, programs and spending and budget based on the size of the county and did look for outliers. So that or there might be a likelihood, but there is just an element of we haven't been to that county in a while. It's probably due that we go there.
Okay. Okay. That's all we have time for. We are
Okay.
at time. We've
Okay.
got some more questions coming in, but we always do. We try our best to get to those highest rated questions. Now we'll advance the slide to give everybody their final code as we end the webinar. You can see that code on your screen. This is the final code 994. Please go and enter that. Make sure you get credit and you'll receive your certificates here in a few weeks. That does conclude our webinar. I want to thank you again, Chris, for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. As a taxpayer and a Kentuckian, I especially appreciate the FBI's efforts to pursue corruption cases in this region.
Well,
Many thanks to Meredith Johns of the NASDAQ staff who makes all of this possible behind the scenes. One last thing, please use the conference app to gather feedback, or we use it to gather feedback. So please provide that feedback. And we really appreciate it. We use that to try and give you content that will be helpful, like today's webinar. Our next event will be titled Maintaining the Public's Trust, pretty timely with the session we just had, Ethics in State and Local Government. That's scheduled for November 7th, and registration is available on our website at nasdaq.org. That will be the final webinar of what was a packed 2024. So we really appreciate all of your support. We have wonderful members and our guests today too that are outside of our membership. We really appreciate your all's support throughout the year. Chris, great job, very informative, and I hope everybody, including you, Chris, has a great rest of your day.
all right. Thank you very much.